Welcome to the Generation Hustle podcast, a show that explores the world of business, entrepreneurship, and culture, all centered around the millennial. I'm your co-host Sherison, alongside my good friend Amin, and today we talk with Andre Garber, partner at Fasken, a leading international law firm with more than 700 lawyers and 10 offices across 4 continents. And today we're going to be talking about startups. What goes into creating a startup? The tech boom brought on a world of new startups with entrepreneurs brimming with ideas, angling to share their vision with the world. One idea is all it takes to spark the next billion-dollar entity. However, what's lost in the noise is the regulatory environment and strategic plays that occur behind the scenes that lead to the success. Enter Andre Garber. In addition to being a partner at Fasken, Andre is also the co-chair of the firm's Startup and Emerging Companies Services Group. In this role, he advises companies throughout their entire lifecycle, from formation to exit. As a recognized leader in Ontario's tech ecosystem, Andre is a trusted and tireless advocate for all of his clients. So we talked to Andre about what it takes to create and grow a successful startup. He walks us through the business law matters that every entrepreneur should be aware of, such as fundraising and global expansion, as well as short and long-term strategic decisions. If you're looking to enter or create a startup of your own, you do not want to miss this episode.
We also want to give a special shout out to today's sponsor, Podcorn. So let me ask you this. You're a growing brand looking to partner with other companies to help scale your business? Or you're like us, a podcast looking at brands to partner with? Like many business founders, you find it extremely difficult to find these opportunities. Well, that was their case originally for the Generation Hustle podcast before we started using Podcorn. Podcorn is a marketplace connecting podcasters to amazing sponsorship opportunities, such as post-read ads, interview segments, topical discussions, and more. With Podcorn, there is no middleman. Podcasters of all sizes can browse and choose opportunities right on the platform, set their own rates, and collaborate with brands directly with no exclusivities. This opens up the opportunity for you as a business or a podcast to scale much faster. So what are you waiting for? Check out podcorn.com to start growing.
So we just wanted to get started off with kind of a little bit of your history and your fascination with the tech space, obviously being a lawyer in the tech space. We just wanted to understand where that kind of started from and what brought you to this.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I mean, I've always been kind of toying around with technology, since I was younger. Never went to engineering, school or, got an engineering degree, but I did my undergrad in radio and television at Ryerson. And even before that, I used to DJ and kind of throw parties in high school. And, I built a little amateur recording studio in my parents' basement. And,
I love it.
Just like wiring recording studios and, kind of working on sound and software editing, a bit of video editing too. So I've always been just kind of this user of software and, not just a Microsoft Word user of software, but, actually creating, media through software and stuff. So it was awesome. I remember going to New York by myself for a few days when I was in high school to go learn Pro Tools, which was this audio recording software. And I don't know, it was grade 11 or something. It was the best 3 days of my life. And I was basically just lived in that studio and I was just soaking up as much as I could.
For sure.
So I think it was just, mainly from the audiophile side in me to kind of get fascinated with tech.
For sure. Yeah. And obviously now you're a partner at Fasken in your current role. So we love to see that progression and how you kind of brought your passion together with your career. And one of the stories that I like a lot is you created a startup program at a law firm before this role, at a prior role. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, for sure.
You're giving me a look, so I wasn't sure if you didn't want to talk about it. So.
No, I'm happy to open my life up to you guys. So, but yeah, no, I just finished. I was just finishing articling at my prior firm, and needed to sort of create the next opportunity for myself. I actually wanted to pitch a job to Mars. I was thinking, well, this was around 2013. And I was thinking, well, there's a lot of companies out there that are probably consuming these legal services that are so far off from being able to pay for these rates and, actually have access to the right people. So I thought, well, why not, pitch something to Mars where you can, create some sort of, repository of information or documents that could help people, have access to things. You may be two e-commerce companies that are competing with each other, but if you're like, okay, shit, I'm just going to save like 50% on my legal bill for this, like, okay, fine, I'll talk to this competitor when I'm starting out, and like we could, draw from the same knowledge bank or something. But the firm sort of heard about it and said, well, why don't you pitch that to us? And I was, like I said, I was in Ottawa at the time, and I'm from Toronto, so I went back to Toronto to pitch this. I put a pitch deck together. I like grabbed some email quote from someone who said something nice about me, and I was like, see, this guy said it. Just basically, tried to get myself a job. And then, that was in, late 2013. And I guess it just kind of mushroomed from there. And, within 1 year of my first year of being a lawyer, I had 81 unique timekeepers at that firm touch the files that I was bringing in and working on, including lawyers, paralegals, students, etc. And it just seemed to be, picking up really well. So I did that for about 5 years, and now happy to get a spot on the roster at Fasken.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. And that's amazing. Like, what was the initial feedback? Did they kind of have the same vision that this was going to be as successful as you pitched it, or?
I think it was kind of a wait and see.
Right.
Law firms are pretty traditional in terms of, their business models. And I think that, sometimes with law firms, innovation efforts that you see can maybe be a little bit more of a marketing effort than a substance filled effort internally.
Right.
And so I think it was a wait and see, but I think the firm, quickly saw the success and just wanted to support it further. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity I had at that firm, for sure.
For sure. Yeah. It took off well. And I feel like it's such a niche market that a lot of people would have otherwise ignored. Right.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
And so you're a partner at Fasken, right? Which is an industry leader within the tech space when it comes to innovation and startup advising. So can you kind of talk a bit more about your approach in terms of what Fasken brings to the table, and then how you guys help companies? I know there's a various amount of ways, but if I was to generalize, a startup comes up to you, what kind of things do they ask, and what's the approach you guys take?
Yeah, Fasken is the largest team in the country doing this work. There's about 40 of us full time from coast to coast, and I guess technically the East Coast stops in Quebec City, but coast to coast ish. The common thread with us is that we really take the time to sit with founders, and we don't work with every single founder that comes through our door or founding team or company. But we really do take that time to, scope things out, listen to founders, hear what they're up to, speak their language. We hope that, they speak our language too, and we educate them through the process. And, when founders grow up and raise rounds of financing, you hope that there's that nice two-way feedback where, you can almost professionalize their business over time. Before there's a CFO, before there's any of that kind of, professionalization of the business, you try to be there to help them kind of think about things 2 steps ahead or 3 steps ahead or whatnot. That's not, you can't bill for every single minute of your day, but you have to be available so you can actually help them think through problems or, help them foresee problems before they happen.
Right. And when it comes to any legal advice, what are kind of like common mistakes that startups make before coming to you, and then maybe you have to fix them, or what kind of generalized areas are they weak in?
I think that there can be a general theme around, how are you managing your equity with your, employees or your advisors or, other directors you're bringing on board or contractors, even from the early stage. You can even set up a stock option plan for companies, and then, but you actually have to administer it, and you have to think about how do you weave that into your hiring process, and, what are you pricing your stock options at, and while that's not a purely legal thing, law firms aren't typically providing valuation services.
Right.
It's things that, startups need to be thinking about. I mean, there's a common thread of like, make sure that the company owns the IP, but if
Right.
you can't, if you're a founder and you can't find like an employment agreement online, that is specific to the jurisdiction you're in. Okay. Don't like pull a Delaware law employment agreement for Ontario. That's just not right.
For sure.
But if you can kind of get yourself the way there and make sure that IP gets assigned in, it's usually not an issue that we see because, founders are generally pretty attuned to that. And I think if you're missing that, I think you probably have bigger systemic issues. It's like a symptom of an illness, if you will.
Yeah. And so you mentioned a very important topic right there. It's IP, right? With obviously the tech world booming now and a lot of companies not owning physical assets, but intellectual property. What kind of shift have you seen in terms of your role and how you kind of approach it as a team? Because I know in the accounting industry, we've been taught now to really focus in on how do we protect our IP as well from the accounting perspective and how do we evaluate that and all that. But from a legal perspective, what's the definition around what IP is, and what are some problems you see that startups kind of continually get in when it comes to IP? I know there's probably a lot of things going on in the background, but generalize.
Yeah, I mean, generalizing, it's really, IP is around, your intangible and intellectual property, right? So I think that the key to starting to understand how you should go about protecting your IP is actually speaking to specialists who don't just force you down the path of saying, oh, that's really cool, we should try and patent something. It may be the case that, you shouldn't be patenting something. Like you should be, so I think when you're looking at an IP strategy, you kind of have to say, well, there's kind of two main buckets of, hard IP, which is patents, and then the softer IP, copyright, trademarks. I mean, just that, just this show alone, this podcast is going to be copyrighted because now what you're doing is you're taking an idea and you're putting it into a fixed form, right? That recording, you automatically create copyright. You don't have to register that. But, and this isn't legal advice, by the way, but, you don't have to register it, but, it is automatically, copyright creation, right? But when you start thinking about patents, well, you have to think about, there's a cost to protecting your IP from a hard IP perspective and filing patents. And there's a strategy around it. And, I think that the good IP specialists that I've seen, I'm not an IP guy, but the good IP specialists that I've seen are the people that take a step back with these companies and start thinking about their IP strategy as a whole and start to say, well, what are your competitors doing in the space? And, what kind of alerts do you have on them? And what kind of patents are they filing in the space? And what are you seeing? And now, not every patent is, publicly available throughout the, the whole registration process, right? You can file certain, applications in the States, for example, where, your patent stays confidential while you can make some amendments to the claim, for the first year. And so you can't always see what your competitors are doing at every step of the way. They're filing their own patents, but, it's important to actually think through from a business perspective, like what are you going to do about protecting your IP? And, I wouldn't just go in that one-dimensional, well, if you have an invention, you should patent it because inventions get patented. That's just not the case all the time.
Right.
Fair. And hopefully we're not going to get an invoice for billables after this conversation. But
I'm not going to make any promises on that.
Spoken like a lawyer, but yeah. So I mean, you've dealt with a lot of founders, obviously, in your role, and kind of working with them in these companies. So what area along the life cycle do you find that they require the most assistance? Like whether it's formation or exit, like where do you find that you're providing the most assistance to these founders?
Yeah, I mean, documents get changed, agreements get changed multiple times between the formation and the exit. The exit it's a hugely important part, but there's also steps along the way that are, just as important, if not more important from, an economics and control perspective that may actually dictate what you get on that exit event. So, those fundraising events that happen along the way can be extremely important. They can happen really quickly, but it's really important that you're getting the issues and you understand the issues, quickly and while that fundraising event is happening or leading up to it. I mean, there are things that I do where, I'll send due diligence request lists to clients, before financing rounds happen. And, sometimes I'll walk them through it or I won't, but, I'll send them the list and say, look, this is what your investors are going to send you. Just look at it and start getting your house in order, start doing that. And, so that you're not wasting people's time, as you go through the process. And they find that pretty helpful because, then the cleanup around financings and, the things that they're thinking about, okay, yeah, well, there was that missing IP assignment, or, we do need to, grant a couple options before this happens, or whatever the case may be. They'll go through that and they'll get their customer contracts in order, et cetera. And then there's like other pieces that, may be sort of less transformational transactions or that the company kind of deals, but there's the ongoing commercial contracting, or like the relationship management through contracts. Like, what are your customers signing? And like, are you putting together paper that is creating friction or not? I mean, there's some industries where you hate to see this, but the contracting process with some big corps, it just takes a long time, and companies need to understand that. And it's better that they just understand it up front, so that, for example, if they're raising funds and they're saying, okay, well, we're raising for an 18-month runway, but our sales cycle is 18 to 24 months without necessarily budgeting for contingency as well. I mean, you're kind of fucked at that point. So you have to think about things realistically with, how you're raising. So they do fit together, and that's why I'm kind of bringing up both at the same time.
For sure. So a lot of level setting that you'd say then, especially when working with founders, letting them know like expectations and what they're going to walk into. Yeah, for sure. Like you're not always giving people the news that they love to hear, but that's not.
That's not your job, right? To kind of.
I mean, I don't even call it a job because, I love what I do. So it's not really a job, but, I would say, this is, you have to be as realistic as you can be.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that brings us actually to a perfect segue when we talk about fundraising and obviously providing feedback. So companies go out through like seed round, Series A, Series B, and each round has its own unique kind of factors. So kind of describe me some critical factors that you need to consider before raising any money from a legal or deal perspective for any founder at any stage.
Like you're saying in terms of, what
the due diligence or like what it is and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, just to kind of add on some of the things we were chatting about before, your cap table with, which is really just that, snapshot of the ownership of the company at any given time, mapping out, people's rights to the shares or, the rights to the percentages, of equity in the company.
Right.
Your cap table is going to get, larger and larger as you go along, and what you'll see in multiple rounds of financings is that, some of the things that you agree to early on can stick around kind of like a plaque that can sometimes be irreversible, and it just kind of builds up. So, when you talk about things like a liquidation preference, which is really, the best way to think of a liquidation preference is it's an economic protection, which can be used for control, but it's an economic protection that protects the investor's capital in the event of a kind of a suboptimal sales scenario. And there's different, there's many permutations of a liquidation preference.
Right.
But when you start out, your first few rounds, you want to try and get everybody, all the investors, even if it's a seed round and then an A round and a B round, you want to try your best to get all those investors on the same equal footing of liquidation preference, so that, you're not sort of stacking, if you will. Right. And that can be a bit more punitive, to the common holders where the founders are sitting.
Right.
Right.
And so can you kind of deep dive into liquidation preference? I know a lot of startup founders get surprised by this term after they see a few rounds of raising money and some things happen and they notice that they're left with nothing.
Yeah.
So can you give an example of this and why they should be, is this something that they should put some emphasis on and know about?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's really two main concepts to understanding the liquidation preference. The first one is the multiple, right? So investor puts in $5 million. If it's a 1x liquidation preference, then that multiple is, as long as they get their $5 million out, then, they're happy. Well, they're not necessarily happy. I doubt they'd be happy at all, but
they're satisfied.
That, in the event, let's say the company was sold for $4 million, they would get 4 in the event that and the commons wouldn't get anything in the event that the company was sold for 6, they'd get 5, and then the rest would be split amongst the commons. So, but if it's a 2x liquidation preference, then that's 2x the capital in effect. So, unless they get 10 million out, then they're not going to participate with the commons in on a equal percentage basis or on a pro rata basis. But the next thing is the participation rate, which is, you don't often see it. You definitely don't see it often in Series A financings. You may see it later on a little more frequently, but the participation rate is essentially the right for investors to get their capital out, or the equivalent of their capital out, and then assume that they're converting into commons, and they basically participate with the commons after they get their capital out. So investors, let's just say for the sake of napkin math, the investors put in $10 million, the company sold for $100 million, and they own 10%. They're going to get their 10 million out, and then they're going to get 10% of 90 million, which is remaining. Okay. So that's kind of the way that the participation rate works. If it's 1x non-participating in that example, they're just going to get they're going to have a choice of either getting their 10 million or whatever the 10% on conversion equates to, whichever one is greater.
Okay. I think that's very important in those examples. I just learned about participating, right? So right there. So, it's huge. It makes a huge impact. I know one of my buddies, they raised about $5 million and they had, let's just say it was not a great story. They sold for $6 million. And I think he just figured out what liquidation preference is on the sale. And he's like, yeah, they had a liquidation preference of $5.5 million. I spent like 7 years building this business and I got left with like 100K.
Yeah, like it's kind of eerie that our first examples are the same. I don't know, they're not related. I think that, there are sometimes, there's examples where there's management carve outs as well, where you can kind of carve out some for management and, you sort of deal with the fact that, management may move over to the new company. But it's really, that's what that liquidation preference is for. It's to really protect the investor's capital as part of the deal.
Right.
So it's just better that founders actually understand what that means. Right. For founders to go and, if they're going to a generally accepted pool of venture firms to, do their deals, and they're pushing back on the existence of a liquidation preference because in theory it's not fair. That's just, that may be tough for them to, to have those shares as, marketable, saleable shares to those VCs.
Right. Yeah. And so that brings us to almost like a crossroads now, the equity versus debt financing. I've seen a lot more founders try to focus more on debt financing. Obviously, we know that equity finances is always more expensive than debt financing. But with later stage companies, do you think founders should start exploring more options for debt financing just as a vehicle to kind of scale your business versus an equity raising?
I think founders should just start looking at debt from when they start the company and understand it and understand, there's different forms of debt. There's many kinds. There's also credit card debt. And so I think that what you want to do is you want to start building up your credit history as a company as soon as you can. You're not going to get, a big loan when you just incorporate a company.
Right.
I mean, obviously, like, again,
Personal
depends,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
this, left hand, right hand shit. But my point is, you're not going to be, you're not going to have that kind of credit history immediately. But, as soon as you can get a small line of credit, or as soon as you can start getting some small facility, it's important to start thinking about getting that going for the company, and maybe even just drawing a token amount of the credit facility down, or the line of credit down, and paying it back if you can, that kind of thing. I think it's good to start building up the credit history. But yeah, I mean, the big difference obviously is that debt is not dilutive capital, right? For the most part. And, venture debt does come with some minor dilution sometimes, because, some of the venture debt providers are going to take what's called warrants. And so they're basically going to have that contractual right to buy shares. And, typically they'll be nominally priced, but the concept stands. Like, even with that small amount, it's not really dilutive financing. So what a lot of companies do is, when they're going for that kind of first institutional round after the seed, they'll typically, raise a little bit of venture debt alongside, or just traditional debt from in Canada, it would be a Schedule I bank kind of thing, the equivalent. It's a not uncommon way of sort of splitting that up. So if you need 8 million, if you raise 6 with equity, and you have a line of credit, or a term loan, or whatever the case may be, whatever's appropriate for your company, of 2 million, that's another way of doing a little, equity and debt mix.
Right.
For sure. Yeah. Sorry, did I just cut you off?
No. Go ahead.
Okay. So one of the things that, like, obviously you mentioned throughout is having worked with venture funds as well. So you get kind of both sides of it, the venture funds as well as founders. And I wanted to kind of go into the other side just to get a holistic image and understand the common mistakes from the venture side. So can you speak to that a little bit?
I mean, I would probably say that, a common mistake that doesn't necessarily happen frequently is, I think when investors push really hard on some of these rights that we were talking about before, right? Like a participation right, a liquidation multiple. I think that, to me, philosophically, especially at earlier stages, it can kind of set the wrong alignment up.
Right.
I think that, investors will typically ask for certain, veto rights or protective provisions, which, in a sense are fair and understood in the venture capital space.
Right.
But I think being too restrictive and, being too harsh on, too controlling of the company early, I think can kind of set the wrong tone. And actually, that whole thing about certain VCs being more founder friendly than others, it's really, VCs are going to need rights. If they're investing in a private company where, generally information shared by private companies to their shareholders is okay, but pretty limited, certainly not the same, as public companies, then, it's sort of reasonable, if you think about it, to have a set of rights associated with owning 20% of a business, or 18 or 15% of a business, if you're the risk capital behind it. But, that difference is, do founders feel good about taking that, taking those terms or not? And obviously certain founders, it's just going to be, they may naturally not want to give up that kind of control, or, control over fundamental decisions. But, I think that there's a balance to be had there. And I think, like, good deals get lost if, terms are too restrictive sometimes. The other thing is just also from the founder side, founders should understand that, VCs are really just getting a snapshot of the company, right? They have a bunch of companies in their portfolio, or the more mature ones do. So it's like, it's really on founders and it's on the VCs too, to ask. But, if you're getting a board pack every 2 or 3 months, that you may not be diving deep enough into, understanding what the company is going through. And, those snapshots may not, in isolation, they may not actually be that helpful.
Right.
So, I think that one of the kind of, I don't want to say mistakes, but, one of the areas which, which you kind of see good stories going, is when, you know, VCs and founders, you know, or the upper management have really good relationships. Not just about the founders, like give your chief operating officer the license to, you know, build that relationship with your investors. You know, do things like that so that there's that open line, and, you know, your investors can be most helpful when you actually need it the most, so that, you know, you're not kind of asking for help and, you know, when there's just these little 3-month snapshots of the company.
Right, for sure. So can you give us any examples without obviously naming names or anything like that? We want to hear some of the interesting deals that you've been involved with at this capacity. Like, can you share kind of maybe one of the most interesting deals?
So like, yeah, I mean, well, there's so many deals, but I guess like one interesting one was like when I was starting out, and it was basically came in as like a litigation matter. This was just, you know, long-standing relationships between these companies, and then it actually just turned into one company buying the next, and it's like worked out extremely well for both parties.
Yeah.
So it was like sort of out of this litigation came this opportunity to like do an M&A deal. But I think what was kind of interesting to me was that, you know, I kind of think about that deal sometimes when I think about all these deals all the time when I'm doing other deals, because you just want to, you know, kind of you want to keep applying and thinking through these problems all the time. But, you know, when I deal with, you know, I'm acting for companies and I deal with corporate venture arms, and you kind of think about, you know, the value and some of the potential risks of taking on, you know, venture capital from a corporate investor who, right, you know, you take on money from them, and, you know, where they deploy capital into you, and part of their value is also accelerating, you know, your commercialization, you know, potentially, right? And, you know, but then as a result of, you know, taking on that capital and selling into their ecosystem, you may actually create dependency on selling into their ecosystem. And so it's like this interesting tension, you know, and kind of, you know, there's interesting kind of things that come out of that, interesting action. So, you know, that was kind of one deal that was sort of interesting to me that I still hold on to and kind of think about.
Fair. What about like a bad story?
there's
not everything is rainbow and sunshine, right? Like, we want to know.
Yeah, I mean, man, oh man, that's just like there's a lot of those, but you know, I think it. I mean, there's some times where I'll start working on companies and it's kind of just a little too late, you know, in terms of they've come to me or they've come to the firm, you know, and we're trying to kind of untangle a mess that has occurred, and, you know, we haven't worked with them and we're starting to work with them, and, you know, for one reason or another, you know, things weren't set up properly, or, you know, they, you know, it could be kind of messy. But I think that, you know, there are bad stories around, you know, founders not documenting their equity split early, right, and then some founder just being a real asshole about it.
Yeah.
And you kind of feel for it, you know, you live your clients' like stresses on this stuff too, right?
Yeah.
One of just like one of the most phenomenal venture lawyers in our Montreal office said that to me the other day, and that just like rang so true, and like totally relate to that, and you kind of feel for that, where you just see it, and, you know, so much potential with a company, so, you know, such bright futures, and then, you know, that kind of not going through that process of documenting that equity and the way to kind of claw that equity back, or whatever the case may be, it can just kill a company.
For sure.
Right? Because again, it just goes to, you know, how motivated is the founder to, you know, continue to build this business. Like, when you think about some of these founders, you know, they could be working in corporate jobs. Obviously, it's not like they want to, but they could be working corporate jobs, having stable, healthy incomes, and, you know, they could be building value in their stock. Their stock could be worth 10 million, 20 million, 100 million, $200 million. And, you know, I think at that point, you know, when their equity is worth, you know, 8 figures and above, they're probably, you know, going to start making an okay paycheck.
Right.
But, you know, from that period to get the company there and bring other people along, if they don't have the right equity stake, then what's their motivation, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I want to go back to one of the things that you mentioned there. Like you're living the stresses and the good times and the bad times of the founders that you're working with. So when you run into those like instances where they're having these unfortunate events that you can't control because it's kind of just out of your hands, like how do you cope with that? Like, because obviously you're there to be their support as well, but at the same time, it's like you're just doing your job, but it's taking a toll on you as well. So like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I say that on the one hand, but realistically, you have to be that voice of reason, and you have to be objective, and you have to help you live the stresses, and you kind of feel them with your founders. But at the same time, you're not those founders, and so you just remember that, and you give that objective advice, and you help them through the scenarios. It's one thing, you can never let that color your judgment that you apply to it. You just hear it and you feel it, but you take your step back and you put your feet on the ground or whatever you need to do, and then you advise them through whatever tough scenario they're going through.
Very practical advice.
Yeah, so
very stoic.
Tech conferences now, Andre.
This isn't even real.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. No, it's important. It's important to hustle with your clients, right? But you have to help them see through these issues, and you have to help them see around these corners, right?
For sure.
Yeah, for sure. So tech conferences, Andre, you've mentioned a lot of this, and we actually have a quote from you saying like the absence from a tech conference signals, like your absence from a tech conference signals a successful conference, because that means you were busy behind the scenes making deals, right? So can you kind of walk us through why like these tech conferences, obviously this year is a bit different with COVID and stuff going on, but say for example, Collision Conference, like walk us through why these events are so important in your mind, and even for like your clients.
I mean, I think they're really good touch points, for people to stay in touch and, connect with new people. Like, I think that, I personally do not go to a lot of these conferences, but doesn't mean that I don't want to, or that I'm like, I don't have FOMO as I'm kind of like everybody's at these conferences and I'm, working away or whatever the case may be. But, I try to make it out to conferences. I've been to Web Summit a bunch of times. I've been to a bunch of conferences, and they're just awesome. And it's just great to connect with people in, these informal settings, and, go to dinners and take people out for coffees, or go out for coffees with people, or have some drinks and connect with people. And I think that, it's nice. It's a really nice atmosphere to do it. I think for founders to go to a conference and say, I'm going to go to this conference, and by the end of this conference, I'm going to close a deal. I mean, it's not that realistic, right?
Yeah.
But there's always work to be done around that. And I think the idea is, just as founders are trying to sell into large enterprises, it's like you got to run a process when you're looking to raise a round, or when you're looking to, make a sale, or whatever the case may be. You got to run a process, and, building conferences into your process it can be really effective. For some companies, it could be a total waste of time.
Right. Yeah. It all depends on your company and your scenario, your industry. So a lot of multiple factors playing in terms of what you guys want to achieve and how fast you want to achieve it, I assume.
Totally.
Okay, cool. So the tech boom also brings us to like companies now like opting out of their IPO because they were premature. Let's give you great examples. WeWork, Smile Direct. So you also explained in a 2017 article that there's a rising trend of these companies trying to stay private longer. And so like what kind of factors go into that, like from public to private? And let's just use WeWork as the perfect example, because
wow. Wow. Right. Like, wow. But I think that there were a lot of things going on. I mean, if you read that S1, but I think that, from my perspective, if you don't have, I wouldn't say stable revenue, but if you don't understand, your revenue, trajectory, if you will,
right.
like, you know, you go public and you miss a couple quarters of earnings calls and you're crushed, right? And
Right.
you know, you know, if you want to go public, then start thinking about building a public company. When you're private, start thinking about, you know, what does it take even from an early stage to get audited statements and to start going through and professionalizing your business, you know, and, you know, talk to your VCs about, you know, what are the metrics that you want to see quarterly or, you know, every month or whatever the case may be, to help us, you know, start building in those disciplines into our company. You know, what kind of policies can we put in place? You know, just anything, you know, harassment policies and computer acceptable use policies. Start actually like building out your policies and start building out your, you know, your framework for growth so that you're ready to be subject to the kind of public market scrutiny that you would have, right? And I think, like, you know, I don't see this all the time, but I think it would be great for, you know, for there to be dialogue at the executive level for, you know, coaching and, you know, training around things around like diversity and inclusion and thinking about how to build a diverse board. And, you know, that we definitely, I mean, we need more of that anyway, but, you know, when you're talking about, you know, going public, you really do need to have a pretty buttoned down process for all these things.
Yeah. And I totally agree that, like, the thing I can come from an accounting perspective is like the company I worked with before, we're trying to set up maybe in a couple of years going public. So what kind of things coming from audit? I had some exposure to obviously public companies. So you need to start like pushing out quarterly financials. You need to have your internal controls ready to go. And then they hired a real like top-notch HR person to come in and build all these policies in place. And that kind of, again, to your point, the process and structuring to maybe you're not going to IPO within a year, but at least it creates a habit of, you know, we're ready, we can get audited, we know what we're kind of going to get ourselves into. And there's no like fear in terms of IPOs.
And I think part of it is, you know, think about whether what you said just now is related to, you know, product development and dealing with customers. Probably not, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe that is seen as a distraction. If the company and its backers sort of see putting those processes in place as a distraction, then probably you shouldn't be going public.
Yeah, exactly. And I think founders and or teams in general should be aware of what life cycle their product's in and how commercialized their solution is. I mean, if you're still like early stage and you haven't really hit like a certain threshold of revenue and or market share, I would say, I don't think IPOs are really too smart in most cases. I've seen like companies of like $5 million market caps doing IPOs, and it just doesn't make sense to me sometimes, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I guess it all depends on the company and how you structure it, but also the life cycle of the product makes a huge impact in terms of where your company's headed. For sure.
Yeah, and you know, SaaS businesses, solid recurring revenue, nicely done contracts around renewals and renewal options, and you know, payment up front and those kinds of things. I mean, you could set up a really nice SaaS business. It could be, you know, laying nice ground for going public.
For sure.
But yeah, I mean, there's so many factors. Timing
is huge as well. Yeah.
For sure. So you have a unique story in how you kind of forged your path with tech, especially with founders and through the startup program and things like that. So what kind of advice would you give to future lawyers who are interested in the tech field and looking to get involved in that, similar to your path?
Yeah. Wow. You know, I definitely would recommend it as a career. I'd say, you know, I think you really need to know your industry. Knowing your industry can be really helpful. You know, if you want to be the world's best mining lawyer, then like get to know the mining industry and like the natural resources industry and you know, resource extraction, whatever it is. Like, I think that's really important, and start thinking about, you know, what areas of that industry you're passionate about, right? Like, you know, and I think that it may seem like a niche. I see this as just a massive opportunity to service this growing industry, or, you know, subsets of industries that are happening in Canada.
For sure.
You know, and around the world, frankly. I mean, I work with companies in, you know, many different countries, and, you know, the tech world is just the most dynamic and exciting world in my view, right? In my personal view. And so, you know, if you're, I wouldn't say younger lawyer, but if you're starting out, whatever stage, and you're migrating into a legal career, then start thinking about what kind of industries you're passionate about, and start aligning yourself, meeting folks that, you know, well, maybe they'll give you work one day if you're, you know, if you're connected to them, and you start to learn what their problems are, and you can help them through those problems.
For sure. Yeah. And just with tech and how dynamic it is, like you said, like it can intersect with so many different industries. So it's like a lot of it is like brand new, right? Like there's only so much you can learn. And after a certain point, you just got to get your foot in the water.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's just so many people, you know, it's interesting. I mean, this is, again, just coming from the Toronto perspective as well. Is just, you know, it's this growing ecosystem, and there's this constant refresh because Toronto's a growing city. So you got a growing ecosystem in a growing city. It just makes for a pretty awesome dynamic that's happening here. But again, very biased to this, you know, to what's happening here. So
that's totally fair. We wanted your opinion anyway, so it's okay to be a little biased with that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like your work side, and we like to kind of get another segment of kind of you, Andre Garber, like the background of you. So we're going to hit you with the lightning round here. I don't know if you had a chance to look at the questions. Sometimes we like to surprise you.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm going to give you like 10, 20 seconds for each of these questions, and just say the first thing that comes to mind. And if anything comes out, we can always edit it out.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you setting the tone there. I'm going to hold you to that, okay?
All right.
I felt I had to cover my bases. So let's start with something easy. What was your favorite book of all time?
Man, I would probably say The Godfather.
Okay.
I mean, I obviously love the movie, but yeah,
for sure.
That I guess, like, probably, you know, there's that all for me, like, you know, The Firm by John Grisham, but lightning round, out of respect, I'm going to stay with The Godfather.
All right. We love it. No, yeah, normally I get the movie, but that's the first time I got the book. So you had a long day at work. Obviously you're a busy guy. We haven't been able to catch you for the last couple of weeks. How do you come home and unwind after a long day? You might be doing this tonight since it's a long weekend, so.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, you know, I would just say, like, having, you know, cooking a nice meal or having a nice meal and watching some basketball. I'd say those are probably, that's my combo right there.
Raptors in the final.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Come back, right?
There we go.
Back. The league's back.
I know. I've been seeing that ad of, you know, Siakam and Fred VanVleet, you know, holding that peanut butter and champwich or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
VanVleet says back to back. And like, you know, I've never yelled at a commercial before out of excitement, but I don't know. Just I saw it yesterday when the Lakers were playing the Clippers, and you know,
that was a great game. That was a really good game.
Yeah. I watched the first half, went to bed, checked the highlights, kind of, you know, at 6:30 in the morning, checked the highlights, and then went about my day. So
yeah, makes sense.
Totally fair. All right. So next one here. Name one company that excites you the most right now.
Wow. I mean, man, there are like thousands of companies out there. So I guess I'll just champion like a local hero. There's a company called Athenian that I think is phenomenal. You know, they're, to me, an unsexy business in the kind of, you know, millennial description sense, because they're a SaaS company that sells to law firms.
Okay.
But you know, and legal departments. But I mean, you know, I think I've looked at, you know, legal tech for a while. I spent time, you know, being sort of a junior analyst or, you know, advisor, if you will, at a legal tech fund or venture fund, corporate venture fund. And, you know, there's AI, and there's, you know, deep learning, there's all these advanced, you know, techniques of, you know, learning upon your data and making smarter decisions around your data and all that, which is great. But, you know, what's exciting about that company is that it's just fundamentally building an incredible and useful product with great product market fit. And so, you know, I think I think that, before you get into, AI, and before you get into, building out something, I don't know, more experimental, if you will, like they're just servicing a need in the market, which is keep your corporate records clean and, manage your entities and give clients and give lawyers access to, corporate information wherever you are, and, have workflows and tools around that, but, build that out. So, so to me, I would just say like, that's probably a game changer to watch. In my space. I'm gonna keep my comments strictly confined to legal tech right now.
Hey, that was a great ad. They should check you out for a sponsorship or something.
Or just a discount on the product. I'm cool with that too.
Next question here. In your life, this can be related to your career or anything like that, or it can be unrelated. What is the best piece of advice you've received thus far? Something that you refer to all the time. Yeah,
I mean, there's a guy in our Vancouver office named Keith Spencer who has just done a phenomenal job being helpful to his ecosystem, and has spent decades working and counseling founders and, done board work and, help people through just so many scenarios. And like, the guy is just the most helpful guy. And so, he's like, he hasn't given me the advice of saying help first, but it's just so clear by his actions. I'm just trying to read his advice through how he is. And he's just so helpful. And, and that's probably the most helpful advice I've seen, in a long time, or, useful advice for me, or just as a reminder.
Sure.
And so, just help the people around you. Like, and also, when you see people putting in effort nonstop, then it kind of makes you want to help them more too.
Mm-hmm. For sure. We love that. Especially on the Hustle podcast. So last but not least, our favorite question for all of our guests. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to give you the lawyer answer and say it depends, but yeah, I mean, absolutely, paired with certain toppings, probably not, but generally, absolutely.
Fair. All right. That was a very detailed answer. Normally it's just a quick yes or no. I think this is the first time we've got some depth.
Yeah, let me talk to those people, okay?
I've been getting killed on this one. I'm not really a fan of it, but it seems like 9 of our previous guests don't really agree with me.
I mean, like, I hear you. I think it's just like, you got your answer from me. Tonight, I'm probably not going to order Domino's. But, if I were, it could be an option. Fair.
We love to see it. I'm a big fan of it. So, we keep winning with that question.
Are you just solo pineapple?
No. You need
what's your combo?
You need the sweet and the salty. So you got to go Hawaiian. So you have the salty from the bacon and the sweet from the pineapple, and it meshes so well.
That, and I guess for those with vegetarian restrictions, I guess there's probably some good alternative too,
I can't help with that.
Sun-dried tomato or something.
There we go. That's why you guys are going to edit this podcast.
Yeah.
Get PETA all over you,
Yeah.
So.
Thank you, Andre. Really appreciate your time here. Obviously, all this information is going to be super valuable for all our founders and our listeners, so they can use it anytime. And again, more than welcome to come on again, maybe sometime later, and we'll talk about maybe non-legal things this time.
Sounds good. My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Thank you, Andre.